Grammar skill number 6, semicolons. All right, so the purpose of semicolons is to tell the reader to pause longer than he would for a comma, but not as long for a period. There are two situations in which semicolons are necessary, between two independent clauses and to make sentences clearer. So let's take a few minutes and look at these two situations. Just as a review, an independent clause is a clause that has a subject and the verb, such as she hit the ball, whereas a dependent clause is a clause that does not have a subject or is dependent on another part of the sentence, such as hit the ball. That might occur in a sentence such as this: she ran to the plate and then hit the ball. And that sentence, hit the ball, is a dependent clause. It could not stand on its own because it lacks a subject. And so when we're talking about semicolons, we're only dealing with independent clauses. You cannot use a semicolon to separate an independent and a dependent clause. So that's just a rule review as we go forward. So semicolon use number 1. Semicolons can be used between two independent clauses in place of a conjunction such as and, but, or, etc., or other types of joining words. So for example, first I took out my notebook, comma, and then I took out my pencil. The sentence is perfectly appropriate, but we could replace the comma and simply write, first I took out my notebook, semicolon, then I took out my pencil. By using a semicolon in place of the comma and, we've brought these two independent clauses a bit closer, showing that they're closer in meaning than the original sentence might have shown. Here's another example. I read this story, comma, but I still don't understand it. So a comma conjunction works just fine, or we could remove the joining word but and insert a semicolon to create, I read the story, semicolon, I still do not understand it. So notice we just took these two independent clauses and we simply joined them with another way to connect, which is a semicolon. So that's the first way that you can use semicolons. Just a few notes. You want to use semicolons in your writing if you have two clauses that are closely related and you don't want to use a conjunction or joining word to create an effect. Also keep in mind that semicolons should be used in moderation. So now that you'll know how to use semicolons, you'll want to use them, but not in every single sentence. They can become a little bit redundant. Okay, the second place where we can use a semicolon is to make sentences clearer. For example, if there are commas in independent clauses or lists, a semicolon may be used to separate them. Let's look at an example of that. In this sentence, I told Jimmy, comma, Jackie, comma, and Jason, semicolon, but I didn't tell Sammy, comma, Sarah, comma, or Scott. We've used the semicolon to separate the two independent clauses simply for clarity. Notice we still kept our conjunction, and like we just looked at in the previous rule, ordinarily we wouldn't do that. But because we have two lists on either side of the conjunction, both of which have two commas each, you could see how it might have been kind of confusing to join those two independent clauses with yet another comma. So in that case, we replace that additional comma with a semicolon to make the sentence clearer. Here's another example of using a semicolon to make sentences clear. The test dates are Tuesday, comma, January 30th, semicolon, Wednesday, comma, February 18th, semicolon, and Monday, comma, March 30th. In this case, we have a list of dates, and because dates include these commas, it becomes kind of confusing to list 3 dates in a row also using commas. So simply for the sake of clarity, we use semicolons to divide the 3 lists of dates in order to make it a bit clearer. So this is just for clarity's sake. When commas are excessive in a sentence, use a semicolon to clarify. So go ahead and pause the screencast and turn to exercise 1. Practice rewriting each of the sentences using semicolons according to one of the 2 semicolon rules. When you're done, press play and see how you did. Alright, let's go through the answers. Number 1 reads, Mom found the mess, comma, and she isn't happy about it. So we can simply replace our comma, conjunction, and add a semicolon. Notice we don't even have to capitalize our next letter after the semicolon, we can just join the two independent clauses as they are. Number 2, the judges were from Paris, France, Madrid, Spain, and Venice, Italy. You can see this sentence was pretty unclear with all these commas because we had three items in the list: Paris, France, Madrid, Spain, and Venice, Italy. So we decided we could use a semicolon to clarify the three list items. 2 semicolons. Number 3, the basketball team practices twice a day, therefore they will probably win state. This is a pretty common type of comma splice that we see. Students use therefore to join two independent clauses, but as we reviewed back with sentence errors, therefore is a conjunctive adverb and therefore cannot join two independent clauses. So we'd want to just use a semicolon here to join those two. Again, we don't have to capitalize therefore after the semicolon. We can simply join the clauses as they are. Number 4, I love swimming, snorkeling, and surfing, but I hate skiing, sledding, and snowboarding. So we have these two independent clauses, one right here and one right here, both of which have a list of items. So joining those two independent clauses with a comma might be a bit confusing. So we can simply use a semicolon to join the two independent clauses. That way the excessive use of commas doesn't become confusing. Number 5, is your birthday Thursday, March 22nd, Friday, March 23rd, or Saturday, March 24th. So again, we have this list of dates. The commas become excessive, so we're going to use semicolons to divide the list items themselves. That way there's only commas within the dates, not between the dates as well. And last but not least, I learned her name, but I can't remember it. Let's cross out the comma conjunction and simply use a semicolon. I learned her name, semicolon, I can't remember it. Those are two related clauses where we might like to use a semicolon to join them. Alright, so hopefully you did pretty well on exercise number 1. Go ahead and pause the screencast, turn to exercise 2, and practice writing 2 of your own sentences that contain semicolons. Please try to write one sentence that follows the first rule and one sentence that follows the second rule. When you're done writing your sentences, you can play the screencast to get some tips on how you did. Alright, so just to check on your practice sentences, for the first one, if you wrote one that uses a semicolon to separate two independent clauses, go back and make sure that you use a semicolon correctly. Basically, if you can put a period there instead and it still makes sense grammatically, you've probably used a semicolon correctly. So that's always a nice tip for that first semicolon rule. Simply substitute a period for the semicolon, and if your sentence makes sense still, then you've probably done it correctly. That's kind of a good little tip. For the second sentence that you wrote, if you wrote one that uses a semicolon or semicolons to make sentences clear, just go back and make sure that the semicolons are used to separate pieces of information that are confusing because they already contain commas. If you did that, then you probably used semicolon rule number 2 correctly. Alright, so if you have any questions, call your teacher over. Otherwise, hopefully you feel pretty confident about the semicolon rule.